Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier. I'm happy to be here with you today. It is April 10th. It's approximately 2:30 in the afternoon, and we want to talk about the 2024 election. We want to talk about Joe Biden and the Afghanistan report. What's happening in America? What are we about to see over this summer? Let's have that conversation. But first, we do want to mention, if this is the first time that you're seeing our channel, we welcome you. We thank you for being part of our audience. We want you to know that we do long-form political commentary, and every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream with you. We reach out on all the social media that the internet overlords will allow to be able to hear what you have to say about the issues that matter to you from anywhere in the world, to reach us with your phone calls, your chats, and tell us what you think, because whether your government agrees or not, whether the internet overlords like it or not, your voice matters. The First Amendment is not just for Americans. So we hope you will join us every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for that conversation. Over the Easter holiday, Joe Biden and the White House decided to put out a report, which has been much anticipated in the Congress and around the nation, about the Afghanistan results. What did the Biden-Harris administration do in Afghanistan? What happened that was positive? What happened that was negative? That's what we've been looking for, so that we can better take action in the future and try to guide our international policy that at this moment does not exist. Now, we have long stated on this channel that the Afghanistan rout that took place under Joe Biden by his direction and order was the signal. It was the signal flare that led to Russia going into the Ukraine, that led to China threatening Taiwan. During this time period, Joe Biden has repeatedly been saying to news media that he is looking to run for election in 2024 for a second term. So the release of the report over the holiday weekend, at the last minute, with the president leaving the White House, basically was an attempt to hide the news, to push this off and not let anyone talk about it. And that's a big deal. But we did see yesterday, on Easter Sunday, during the White House Easter egg hunt, Joe Biden talked to Al Roker saying that he was planning to run for re-election. It's something that, as noted by Politico, has been a repeating commentary that we can go back to November of 2022. Joe Biden keeps mentioning to the news media that he's going to run, but Joe Biden won't officially take a stance. Joe Biden will not officially start his run, and we have to wonder, why is that? It seems he's looking for a moment of some positive news, some positive impact in the public that will give him the momentum he needs to be able to run for elected office. And he doesn't have that momentum at this time. If we're going by the most recent March 27th poll, Monmouth University, as reported by NBC News, nearly half, 44% of Democrats do not want Joe Biden as president in 2024. They are rejecting him. In fact, only 25% of Democrats actually want Joe Biden to run. Now, let's be very clear. It's not that 50% of Democrats want him to run. 25% of Democrats, according to NBC, want Joe Biden to run for another term. The rest just don't care. They just want a Democrat in general. That's a very telling statement that there is no true support behind Joe Biden. At the same time, there is no support behind Kamala Harris, who only has 13% support, 6% for Bernie Sanders, 6% for Pete Buttigieg, and 4% support Elizabeth Warren. Democrats have no true outstanding leadership that they want to see in 2024. In fact, that is something that we see throughout not just Democrats, but in general. Looking at the Real Clear Politics poll, what we see is, in a national average, Joe Biden has a 52.9% disapproval rate. In fact, his disapproval has been consistent since August 19th of 2021, which was in the middle of the rout in Afghanistan. Again, that was the signal flare, not just overseas, but here in the United States, where people rejected Joe Biden. They saw his failure, and it was apparent. It could not be disguised. And he has never recovered since that time. But that's part of the reason why the Afghanistan report came out today, so that it cannot be to make this old news, so that the public will forget about it. Normally, in any news story, you go about 3 months, and after that, the public is considered to have not remembered in terms of politics. So this is to kill that issue. They waited 2 years to be able to put out their report so that by the time people get involved in 2024, it's no longer an issue. It's not a story to be talked about. But it's a big deal. And we've been talking about it on this channel for a couple of years now, including the fact that there are 5,000 Americans in Afghanistan who have been abandoned by the Joe Biden administration. And in fact, another 10,000 Americans were abandoned in 2022 in the Ukraine, as we saw when Joe Biden spoke to NBC News' Lester Holt and said he was leaving them behind. Now that we've had a chance over the holiday weekend to actually look at the report by the White House, not an independent report, but a White House report explaining their position, the answer is they blamed it on Trump. Even though Joe Biden was the commander-in-chief, even though all the orders were issued by the Biden-Harris administration, even though everything was done under the orders of Joe Biden, it's all Trump's fault. Gee, does that sound kind of like President Obama? Everything is the predecessor's fault. Nothing was their fault. Okay, according to Real Clear Politics, CBS's Ed O'Keefe stated that it's a watered-down, neutered Afghanistan withdrawal report, and it has been ready for weeks, and they published it ahead of Easter because it was dead news. It was meant to be thrown under a bus. Going by the article, quote, and they're releasing it here on Thursday before the holiday weekend in the midst of the Catholic and Jewish high holidays, when the president literally was leaving the White House as the report was released, and when reporters were given just 10 minutes heads up before they came out for that briefing, which meant that they weren't necessarily able to give the fullest review that would lead to better questions. So we know, and it is confirmed by the news media, this was a setup. Americans weren't supposed to be paying attention to this. We weren't supposed to know what happened. We're just supposed to know that it's Trump's fault, and that's the headline that was pushed by the left-leaning major news media. Trump's fault. Biden is innocent. It was a success in getting everyone out, and that's it. We did also see that Ryan Crocker has said that, quote, the White House, this was a White House whitewash in terms of the Afghanistan withdrawal, and that it's deflecting blame. As reported by the Spokesman Review out of Spokane, Washington, Ryan Crocker is a retired ambassador, has a 4-decade career in the Foreign Service as a top U.S. diplomat in Kabul in 2011 and 2012. So he was speaking about this from his expertise as a former U.S. ambassador. Ryan Crocker says, and I quote, frankly, it's dishonest. This administration, the Biden-Harris administration, ably and amply assisted by previous administration, of course, they were the ones who set the stage for that incredibly swift Taliban takeover. Again, he's pointing out that it was the Biden administration, not the Trump administration, that gave the orders that allowed the Taliban to take over Afghanistan, to push out the United States, that made the decision by themselves to abandon U.S. bases, to abandon our weapons and our ammunition, and to leave money behind for the Taliban to take over. It was the Biden administration that gave the keys to the prisons holding 5,000 ISIS and Al-Qaeda prisoners. That was all under Joe Biden. None of that happened under President Trump. In fact, as we see from the report, while President Trump did negotiate a withdrawal, the conditions of that withdrawal included a peace talk between the Taliban and the Afghan government. That fell through. Those peace talks did not take place. It was a failure. And therefore, there was no reason for Joe Biden to rush nor to try to get out of Afghanistan. That was his decision. He had the capability. In fact, he did modify the deal, at least in part. He pushed back from May 1st to September the time frame for the United States to leave Afghanistan. That was Joe Biden's decision. He didn't have to make that decision, and it definitely wasn't from the Trump administration. So if he could change one part of the deal, he could have changed any part of the deal. But he chose not to. He wanted to be the president who ended the Afghan war. He wanted to be the president who ended 20 years in Afghanistan so that he could be lauded and it would look good for his election, the Democrats' midterm election prospects. The manner in which he did that was a complete fiasco. And even ambassadors, even Democrats are noting that this was a setup. Now, the reason why this is all very, very important is, again, Joe Biden is trying to find a time to pick to launch his 2024 re-election campaign. He's looking for some positive momentum to make his news announcement. He's been looking for that positive window since November of 2022. He has yet to find it. And he needed a way to move this forward, as his approval rating has been underwater, under 50%, since 2021. And that's why we found it very interesting that today, April 10th, Yougov put out a poll, which seems to be authored by the Democratic National Committee, the DNC, on behalf of Joe Biden to test the temperature of the American public. Now, I want to be very clear. Let's take a look at this again. As you can see clearly, in poll after poll after poll, Joe Biden is at 50% or less in basically every single national poll looking at his job approval rating. And overall is 52.9 disapprove of Joe Biden's actions. That's Democrats and Republicans and independents, most importantly. But the Yougov poll that was put out seems to have been trying to see, is there some wiggle room in that? How are Americans overall feeling about this? Now, at the time we took this poll on today, April 10th, there were 519 people at least that were taking the poll at the same time. And these are some of the results, which are not a national poll, but do give us a trend, at least at that moment, a snapshot of what's happening in America. The first question they ask is, do you approve or disapprove of the way Joe Biden is handling his job as president? We strongly disapproved. In fact, 54% of all the people taking the poll at that moment agreed, strongly disagreed, that Joe Biden was a good president. 54%. Only 26% strongly approved, only 16% somewhat approved. That's not a good sign. And that does match the general trend we have seen, as reported by Politico and multiple different polls throughout the nation, looking at how the approval of the job approval of Joe Biden. The poll goes on to say, jobs in the economy. Do you approve or disapprove of how Joe Biden is handling jobs and the economy? Currently, inflation is up. The interest rates are up. Unemployment is up. These are all realities that we have been suffering through for some time now, for well over a year. And the answer, again, 54% of the people who were taking the poll at the time that we took it strongly disapprove. Even though Joe Biden has spent most of 2022 through himself and through the press secretary saying that the economy is great, you just don't understand it. It seems people do understand and they don't like it. Do the general public, people taking the poll at the same time we did, do they approve of immigration? How Joe Biden is handling the open border at the open southern border of the United States, something that Kamala Harris was put in charge of in March of 2021, which has resulted in over 5 million illegal aliens entering the United States, and at least in 2022 alone, at least 98 suspected terrorists were caught trying to enter the United States, several of which we know had plans to try to assassinate elected officials in the United States. 56% of those taking the poll do not believe Joe Biden is doing a good job with immigration. Again, we see a much weaker stance for Joe Biden in terms of immigration, especially with Kamala Harris in charge as the immigration czar. He has failed. Looking at foreign policy, something that we have stated on this channel from day one, there is no foreign policy plan or outlook or outline from the Biden-Harris administration. There wasn't one in 2019 when he was running for the presidency. There isn't one in 2023, 3 years into the presidency. There's just nothing there. So in that, again, 54% strongly disapprove of Joe Biden's actions. 32% approve, and only 9% somewhat approve. 4% somewhat disapprove. So he is doing better, he is perceived better on foreign policy, which we find interesting. That may be because of the Ukraine war, which is well supported by the American public and the American news media. And Joe Biden is leading the charge in supporting the Ukraine with $113 billion given to Ukraine just in 2022 alone, with tanks and possibly fighter planes going into the Ukraine to continue the spring offensive in a fight that was supposed to only last 1 month and we expect may last for 10 years. But this also doesn't really take into account the growing tensions with China and Taiwan, the growing tensions in the Southeast China Sea. It doesn't take into account the missiles from North Korea that were very, very suppressed by the major news media, or the fact that Japan and South Korea are in the middle of escalating their militarization, as is most nations in Southeast Asia, including Guam, including the Philippines. Yet, even with the lack of attention that historically happens by Americans in paying attention to international policy, what we are seeing is that 54%, again, strongly disapprove. There is a trend here. Let's continue. In terms of gun laws, gun control, all of the things that we have been promised, red flag laws, New York SAFE Act, magazine bans, gun bans, we have been promised that all of these things will protect us. Meanwhile, there was a trans shooter that specifically targeted schools based on the fact that there were no armed guards to protect those students, that there was a trans individual in Colorado that was planning to do the same thing as what was done in Tennessee. And of course, over this weekend, a 12-year-old, a 16-year-old, and a 17-year-old used illegal firearms to go out and kill 3 fellow students. Let me say that again. A 12-year-old, a 16-year-old, and a 17-year-old were involved in gang violence to kill and killed 3 children, and none of them were legally capable of owning a firearm. Not one gun law was able to stop that. The sheriff of Marion County in Florida stated directly to the public, not one gun law stopped them from committing those crimes, nor any new proposal. How is Joe Biden being perceived on his promises to make things safe? 56% strongly disapprove. Only 18% strongly approve. 14% somewhat approve. On the issue of abortion, which is a hot button issue for Democrats, this is a big deal for them, and they are very, very much in favor of abortion. Democrats love abortion, and they want to make sure that there is late-term abortion throughout the entire United States if they had their way. With that said, 32% strongly approve what Joe Biden has done to try and promote more abortions in America. 49% strongly disapprove. Almost half the nation do not agree with Joe Biden's efforts to promote abortion and late-term abortion as a federal policy, a federal legislation in this nation. Joe Biden is losing even on that issue, which is perhaps the strongest issue for Democrats to rally behind. The poll goes on to say, generally speaking, how do people perceive Joe Biden? Is Joe Biden a liberal? Is he a conservative? Is he somewhat in the middle? Is he a moderate? He ran in 2019, 2020. His election campaign was based on Joe Biden being a moderate, on Joe Biden being a uniter, not a divider. That's what he ran for election on. How do people perceive him today? 49% of those taking the poll at the time he took it said that Joe Biden is very liberal. Many would consider him a member of the far left, a progressive ideology, kind of like Hakeem Jeffries, a progressive who is the Speaker of the House at this time. That the policies of the Democratic Party are moving further and further left, while the rest of America remains in place and are driven to the right just by not trying to follow where the lead of the far left of progressives. Only 18% find him to be somewhat liberal, and 27% only consider him to be a moderate, someone who is in the middle of the road. No one, virtually no one, considers Joe Biden to be a conservative. And I truly question, what if 4% think that Joe Biden is conservative? I can't imagine how far left you have to be to consider Joe Biden conservative. Maybe if you're a member of Antifa, maybe if you're a member of Progressive Leaders of Tomorrow, maybe if you're part of the Democratic Socialists of America, maybe in comparison to them, Joe Biden would be a conservative, but no one else believes that. The poll goes on to say, how much do you think Joe Biden cares about the needs and problems of people like you? 30% say that Joe Biden is very caring, that he cares a lot. 10% said some. 6% said not much. And overwhelmingly, 54% of the people who took the poll say that Joe Biden doesn't care about the average American citizen. This may be a reflection on things like what we saw at East Palestine, Ohio, and the burning trains that are there, and the response by Joe Biden's Department of Transportation, led by Pete Buttigieg, who wants to be president as well. And we know 6% of Democrats are looking at him as running for president. They just don't see it. The gun laws haven't worked. Inflation, interest rates, the economy is in a recession. They don't see Joe Biden helping the average American citizen, nor does he seem to be connected to them. He seems to be disconnected and out of touch. Regardless of whether you agree with Joe Biden or not, do you like or dislike him as a person? This is the beer summit question. Would you want to have a beer with President Obama? Would you like to have a beer with President Trump? Or would you like to have a beer with Joe Biden? This is a meaningless stat. And the answer is 28% like Joe Biden a lot. 11% like him somewhat. 7% dislike Joe Biden somewhat. And 45%, clearly the biggest answer is 45% don't like Joe Biden. Maybe it's because of the history between him and Hunter Biden and that connection to China and other unsavory stories. Maybe it's the fact that Joe Biden has been seen bumbling upstairs, incapable of walking up a flight of stairs. Maybe it's because his bluff has been called several times when he has threatened world leaders and called them out. Maybe it's because Joe Biden has stumbled through speeches over and over again and has needed cue cards to be able to be told where he's supposed to sit and who he's supposed to talk to, or the fact that all of his questions seem to be prepared questions that are set up beforehand so that he knows the answers as well as who to pick in what order. Whatever the reason may be, 45% dislike Joe Biden. They do not find him to be friendly. They do not find him to be someone they would want to have a beer with. The big question, and I think this is the biggest question because this is the question that is being asked around the world. In fact, this weekend, the president of France, Macron, stated that the European Union should not follow Joe Biden's lead, that Europe should not work in conjunction with America or Joe Biden, but instead should follow the lead of China. That is a lack of leadership. That is a direct statement about the authority and leadership of Joe Biden and the Biden-Harris administration. And that is reflected in what we see in the response to the Yougov poll. 62%. I want to be clear. It's not the 54% that seem to be very strongly against Joe Biden. 62%, more than the disapproval rating across the nation as seen by the Real Clear Politics poll. 62% consider Joe Biden to be a weak president. And I think that's something that is seen around the world. No one is turning towards Joe Biden and America to resolve issues internationally. They are instead going on their own and discounting it. When Japan decided that they wanted to build an army for the first time since World War II, spending $325 billion to build that army within 5 years, they didn't speak to Joe Biden. They didn't ask for his approval. They did it. Joe Biden could not get Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates on the phone to talk about oil prices. He had to go and travel to Saudi Arabia to talk to them because they wouldn't pick up the phone. And the result was oil prices have increased, not decreased. So he failed in that negotiation. There isn't a nation in the world that think that Joe Biden is strong and in his leadership, and 62% of those taking the poll recognize that. 34% do believe that Joe Biden is strong. Again, I don't know what the criteria is they're looking to justify that. Perhaps one of the most important questions in this poll that the DNC are looking for in reference to the 2024 election: do you find President Biden to be honest and trustworthy? It's a yes or a no. 58% of those taking the poll at the time we took it said they do not believe that Joe Biden is honest. They do not believe that Joe Biden is trustworthy. There could be a lot of reasons, but 58% say they do not trust Joe Biden. The poll moves on. Has your opinion of Joe Biden changed since he assumed the role of president? And the answer is 19% said their opinion has changed and they are now more positive about Joe Biden than they were in 2019 or 2020. 28% says their view did change and they view Joe Biden more negatively. And these are the Biden voters with regret, the remorseful individuals who voted for Joe Biden and now are upset with what that has resulted in. Only 18% say that their view of Joe Biden has not changed at all and that they see him as positive, while there are 33% that always viewed Joe Biden negatively and continue to do so. So, positive to negative, we're looking at roughly 61% of the people who took the poll believe and have a negative view on Joe Biden at this time. The last question on the poll is, do you think that Joe Biden will be able to bring unity to the American people? Remember that in 2019, Joe Biden promised that he would unify America. He said he was a president to bring people together, not to separate them. The reality of what we have seen since that time is it was Joe Biden who immediately started demonizing Americans for not allowing the government to mandate experimental medications and jabbing that into their bodies. It was Joe Biden who demonized Americans for daring to want to make America great. He demonized Americans for questioning his policies and his actions, or holding the fact that he abandoned 5,000 Americans in Afghanistan against him. And what does this poll reveal? Do Americans believe that Joe Biden has been unifying in any degree? Only 18% of the people taking the poll felt that Joe Biden has provided unity for America. 75%, 3 in 4 people taking the poll said Joe Biden is dividing America, that he is separating individuals, that he is placing American citizens into categories and then using equity to rank those categories and dividing America, whether it's on gender or sexuality, race, religion, or politics. He has effectively driven wedges into every single type of category that is recorded and made America less unified. We have seen consistently from left-leaning media, from left-leaning polls, we have seen from individuals who are Democrats and have worked in the Democratic Party, we have seen over and over again that individuals are highlighting the negatives, the problems, the issues that are going unresolved or that we are being told to just skim over and avoid. It's just like the Afghanistan report. It was done at the last moment when the maximum number of people wouldn't pay attention to it, to avoid the heartache, the difficulty of admitting that Joe Biden was wrong, that the policy was wrong, that it had negative impacts both for Americans in the United States, overseas in Afghanistan, and around the globe, that he has failed, that he failed on the economy, he has failed on immigration, he has failed on gun control. In fact, I can't think of an issue that Joe Biden has had a success. When Afghanistan fell, when the Taliban was empowered and became a military power, when they were given tanks, when they were given weapons, when they were given ammunition, that was all under the orders of Joe Biden, not President Trump. Joe Biden is the commander-in-chief, and he failed. And rather than admit that, he wants to pass the blame to someone else, and no one accept that as being true. It is a whitewash, as former Ambassador Ryan Crocker highlighted, as even Ed O'Keefe of CBS News is highlighting. The best thing going for Biden right now seems to be the fact the Democrats have no other good, viable option. They just don't have anyone else to pick. But they're not happy that they don't have a choice. But perhaps you think of this differently. Maybe you think we've missed something. Maybe there's some aspect of the Biden-Harris administration you think they have done well. Have they handled East Palestine, Ohio well? Are they handling gun control well? Are they making you safe domestically or internationally? Have they reduced immigration? What issue do you find to be important? Is your money and the value, the cost of things, inflation, is that a big concern for you? What has the Biden-Harris administration done right? And how has that had an impact on you? We'd like to hear your answer in the comments below. And we look forward to seeing you every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time